All right, hello everyone. Nice seeing you again. Welcome to another episode of Till Death Do We Plan, where we talk to widows and widowers about how their family's end of life preparations impacted their widowhood journey. And we are thankful today to have with us Jody LaVoie, who has an incredibly sad story that involved headline news for all of the worst possible reasons. And we'll get to that soon enough. But first, welcome, Jody, and thanks for joining us today. And maybe you could start by just kind of give us a brief summary of your life with Steve, how you met, what the status of your family life was, and careers kind of up until the time that he passed away.
Gosh, absolutely. And Corey and Katie, thank you for having me because these conversations are so important and they're ones that people avoid, put off, and all of the things. And we don't know what life brings. And everyone, you're going to hear my story. And this is one that I certainly didn't expect. So I lost my husband, Steve, about 11 years ago now in a workplace violence incident at our place of business, the business that he founded. And I'll get to that part of the story, but I'm going to talk about first the happiest part of how we met. And we met on a blind date in the middle of the winter in Chicago at a restaurant that was there for a long time. And it just closed this past year, which made me kind of sad.
Huh.
Um, we met we met through a dating service. I don't need to put the name, but we met, blindly at a restaurant and the host introduced us. And he had such a great presence and connection, and he was smart and he was cute. And we clicked right away. And we set up a second date at the Art Institute of Chicago. I live in Chicago. And he seemed very knowledgeable about the exhibit we were going to. And I can't even remember. It was a photographer exhibit. And so I prepared for the date. Like I researched the artist and like I want to have some smart things to say. So anyway, we dated. We dated for about a year and a half. We got engaged, we got married, and then we were so lucky to ultimately have three daughters. And he was a great dad of girls. He loved being a dad of girls. And we were both working, of course, in the city. We lived in the city when we were first new parents. And then, like a lot of parents in the city, we decided to make the trek out to the suburbs to be closer to family. At that point, when we moved to the suburbs, we had had our second child. We were, gosh, 2 years into the business that he founded, which was a supply chain technology business. And we mainly served large restaurant chains. So big restaurant chains. We had a software as a service that helped them do their jobs better. And then we moved some of the product for them via truck. And Steve had this idea. It was one of those like back of the envelope napkin scribbling ideas on a trip that we took to Puerto Rico. And he's like, I've got it. I've solved the supply chain problem and I figured out how I can save all of these clients money and we can share some of that savings, and I'm going to quit my really great stable corporate job and go do it.
And he was doing this by himself, right? He didn't have any partners or anybody joining with him, right?
No, it was his idea and he was executing it. And I, as his wife, was, 120% behind him for sure. And so he did. He quit his corporate job. In time, he built a board of advisors that helped, of course, guide some of the business and any questions he had. But it started on the third floor of our home in downtown Chicago. And like any good entrepreneurial wife, I helped. I did a little of the books. I did some HR. I did some marketing, and that was over many, many years. And then I took some time off to raise our three daughters. And it was while I was home as a full-time mom that I got the knock on my door from a police officer who had told me my husband had been gravely injured. That's all he said. And I said, okay, well, what happened? And he said, well, can you call this Chicago police officer? Here's their number. And I'm like, okay, but what happened? And he wouldn't tell me.
Yeah, they can't tell you.
He's been gravely injured. I'm like, this is not helpful. Okay, closed door. I had two kids at home at that point. One was at band camp. So I went out front, like in the front yard, because I wanted some privacy. I hadn't told them anything at that point, and I called this Chicago police officer, and all he told me was, "Your husband is in surgery. Can you get a ride downtown?" And I'm like, of course, but what happened? Still wouldn't tell me. So I
Mhm.
hung up, called my dad for the ride, and then the press calls me on my phone. It happened that fast, and they said, "Your husband's been shot at work. Care to comment?" I'm like, no. And I hung up. So that is how I found out, was from the press telling me. And I walked back in the house, and I don't like, what do you do in that moment? Do you tell your kids your dad's been shot? And I didn't, because I'm like, I don't have enough information. That's
Right,
really
right.
scary. Like, what do I do? I told him something happened to dad. He's in surgery. I've got to get downtown. I called Nana at church. She's going to come stay with you all. And I left like with I nothing. Like I'd come back from a run, so I actually went did a quick pass through the shower. I grabbed my cell phone charger, and that was it. And my dad was there, and we drove downtown, and it was a beautiful, like sunny summer day. And I remember bright blue sky, and I saw the helicopters like over the high rises in the loop, because that was the press filming the scene of what was happening. And I'm driving, and I'm getting calls from friends who'd heard, like from the news, heard, not local friends. And, and
Unbelievable.
uh-huh. And I mean, I didn't know what to do, like who to call. I called my best friend for sure, and she was living in another state. She dropped everything. She came. Um, I pulled up to the hospital with my dad, and there were news crews there, like waiting for me to walk in. And it just so happened, like we were able to pull behind an ambulance. I scooted out, the police officer whisked me in, and then took me up to this separate, like private conference room type space. And then people just started showing up at the hospital, like friends, some good friends, and some friends that I wasn't actually that close with which I thought was weird. Um, but this room, which I probably had 20 seats in it, there were probably 20 people there. My husband's therapist came, which was like so helpful. Um, so he had surgery. He was shot in the head and in the abdomen. Um, he survived that surgery, and he was moved to a room, and but he never regained consciousness. And so for 3 months, I lived in that state, if you will. Um, I really had a lot of hope at the beginning that he would survive this, like because he was living, and I just thought it's a matter of time. And I was sitting in the room, and I was looking at the time out the window, and there was this building, the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, and they work on traumatic brain injury. I'm like, if anybody could help him, someone there could help him. And I quick like did a Google search. I'm like, who do I know? And there was a dad from my neighborhood who's a doctor on the traumatic brain injury floor. And I didn't know him, I knew his wife. So I texted his wife, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, Jody, we've been wanting to reach out. We didn't know what to do, what to say. Of course, I'll have my husband contact you." They were there that afternoon
Wow.
assessing my husband, and they moved him there to the Rehabilitation Institute. Ultimately, they couldn't do anything for him, and we had to move him to hospice, which we did locally by our home, to a hospital. I just didn't want, it would have been extra hard, I think, for my kids to have dad in the house.
Yeah.
And
In that
So,
hard for me, hard for me.
so he being unconscious, obviously he couldn't speak for himself of the kind of care that he wanted. Did he have an advanced directive that you had completed and notarized and all the things at that point?
Uh, no.
Mhm.
We thought we had all of that stuff. Like
Mhm.
after our first child was born, we sat down with an attorney. We're like, okay, we need a will, we need a trust, we need the things we're supposed to need without knowing what we're supposed to need. Like putting ownership on the attorney, like they're going to tell us what we need and give us all those documents. So, yes, we had a will. We didn't have a power of attorney. We didn't have any medical directives. Um, what else would I have? financial something.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Didn't
yeah,
have that.
yeah.
The only thing we had was a will. And I mean, conversations Steve and I had, which were not detailed by all means.
Mhm.
Um, we had not talked about if we die, what do we had talked about if something were to happen to him, I would be in charge of the business. We talked about that, but that was the extent of that
Right.
conversation. There was no like, okay, call this person, call that person. Here is the detailed plan. Here are all the documents. It was just you're in charge.
So
Did you have any legal, what is that called when you do have a business together and like you're supposed to have those legal documents that
like an
say
operating agreement.
an operating agreement
Yeah.
for the
Yes.
business?
The company was, we had friends and family investors, so we had those as shareholders. We were the largest shareholder, and the way the shareholder agreements were written was Steve had the ultimate vote,
Mhm.
and I guess by proxy that was given to me.
Yeah.
And so I, I mean, I just stepped in basically. The Let's see, the person who was the chief operating officer at the time called me at the hospital. I can't remember who called or he just showed up. But he and I were probably like by day two in conversation about the business. And the hospital was so nice. Like they set up a little meeting room on Steve's floor that was private just for my family and people that were there for comfort and snacks and a break. And so I would have meetings every morning with the chief operating officer. He'd come to the hospital, we'd have a meeting, we'd talk about the business for the day. He would go execute what he needed to do, as well as the other team, the rest of the team, which was phenomenal. And keeping in mind here, the gentleman that was shot, which I didn't even get into, my husband had demoted an employee who came back to the office and shot him. I can't remember if I said that.
No.
So we were down two executive team members. So there had to be a whole reshuffle um, of
So
the executive team.
I want to get into that a little bit more in detail, but before we do, I want to jump back to his care and moving him to hospice. So, without having an advance directive, something in writing that you could sort of rely on as far as feeling like you're accommodating his wishes and what he would want. Talk to us about that process of just how did you go through that decision-making process of deciding what to do? Was it just you? Did you get his family involved? Did the doctors have differing opinions about what to do? And so walk us through some of that.
Yeah. And I think I'm going to start like the day when this happened. I'm in shock. And I think this is important for your listeners because you're in shock. It's really hard to make rational decisions when you're in shock and all of these things happening. So the surgeon came in to this conference room where we were sitting and he sat with me and he said, "Okay, Jody, I need you to sign this paper if you want me to go ahead with this surgery." And it was very clear, I think, on that paper, but I wasn't processing what it said. And I didn't realize the exact surgery this doctor was doing until 2.5 months later. So they removed the entire front lobe of his brain, which they had to do because that's what was damaged. And at the time, I'm like, I mean, I didn't ask any questions about the surgery. I'm like, well, yes, do what you need to do to save my husband. And there was this woman there, um, who was somebody I knew from the neighborhood, not a super close friend. She literally took me by the arms and goes, "Jody, are you sure you want to do this?" And I'm like, "Of course I want to do this. Like it's my husband." But I did not process any of that. So then fast forward to the Rehabilitation Institute part. And one of the doctors there, as we're going through his care and what's happening, the doctor looks at me and he goes, "Jody, they removed the entire front lobe of his brain." And I went, "So what does that mean? Can you live without the front lobe of your brain?" And the doctor started crying and he said, "It depends what you call living." And
Oh,
I'm like, "Oh, okay. Now we have a different decision to make because Steve certainly wouldn't want to just be lying in a bed unconscious for years and years and years on end. I mean, I know that. We never outlined that or said any of that on paper, but I know that. And I wouldn't want to live like that either. Um, but we did not have any of the written medical directives and things. And so it was my understanding if Steve's family wanted to intervene and say, yeah, we want him to live in a bed and exist like that. I believe there could have been, and you may know better than I, some potential issues. Um, so I guess before finalizing the decision, I remember it's weird the things you remember. I literally took like a folding soccer chair from my home, and I'm home at this point. I go to the park across the street, sit in this soccer chair so I can have privacy and have this call with his family to say, this is what's really going on. And Steve wouldn't want this. And so I think we have to move him to hospice. And I just wanted to share that with you. And they said, we understand and we trust you. And we know this is the best decision, as hard as it is. And it was, I mean, his parents were alive and his sister and, all of his side of the family was certainly alive. And I, I didn't even think about calling his mother until she wasn't the first call, and I wasn't processing and thinking, and then as I was there and waiting for the surgery to even start, or it was the first one was in process, I'm like, I have to call his mother. Like, what do I say? And I don't know, at the time she was maybe 80. I mean, her health was fine, but I'm like, I can't tell somebody this on the phone. And because they lived out of state. So I called my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, and they live locally. And I told them, I said, can you please go talk to your parents? Because I don't want to do that over the phone.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's incredible that you were asked to make such important, life-changing decisions at a time where, like, you don't even know what day it is. Like, what is happening? Like, you don't even know what questions to ask. When they say, do you have any questions about the surgery? Well, what questions would you ask? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's just, I mean, that's just part of life anyway. I mean, you could have had all the conversations in the world. There's nothing to prepare you for this.
No.
There just isn't.
And there were, I'd say, a couple narratives going simultaneously over this 3 months while he was living, because there was what was being portrayed in the press. And
Right.
I have a business to run, which I didn't want to go under. And so I had to be very careful also about any kind of public comments, meaning Facebook, Caring Bridge, any of that, because the press was all like in all of that. And this very first day, like Steve's in surgery, the press wants a statement from me. I'm like, okay. I literally I wrote a statement and and I talked about, and gosh, I should probably find this. I had my college roommate was there and she was an English major. I'm like, can you like proof this or do something? But
Where was AI when you needed it, right?
I know it wasn't back then for sure. And so my college roommate was my like editor for any kind of statements I had to make throughout those 3 months. But I didn't just lose my husband. The shooter's wife, and I don't think I said he committed suicide, so he killed himself on the spot. I mean, he had a wife and kids. And here, I mean, yes, this horrible thing happened to my father, or to my husband, but I mean, she lost her husband and their kids lost their dad. And by the way, he committed a crime. He murdered somebody. That had to be just awful. Can't imagine. So my statement included, you know, Steve wasn't the only one that experienced a loss today. And
Yeah.
the
Yeah. So,
employees too.
Yeah.
so you moved him to hospice, and how long was it after you moved him to hospice before he actually passed away?
It was about 3 or 4, probably about 4 days.
Four
It was
days.
not long.
Okay.
And I stayed with him the first couple nights in hospice, because keeping in mind I've been doing all this at the other hospital for months, and I mean I'm moving him there to die. And that's just a hard thing. And anyone who's gone through that final process and the raspiness and the death rattle and it's a lot. It's just a lot. And so I slept there the first 2 nights and we watched my favorite movie. We bought a zoo and I brought some wine that we had purchased together and I stuck my finger in there and I put some in his lips And we watched our last movie and had our last date. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know that one of the things that I think I wish I had done, knowing that my wife had pancreatic cancer, and we knew it was terminal, but it happened fast. Her slide to her death happened pretty fast, and we'd held out hope up until then that she could survive. And I think one of the things that I regret maybe not doing, or questions I didn't ask, was really about the actual look and feel of the actual dying process, and being able to understand and recognize some of the signs of when that was actually taking place. Uh, because for me, I had kids that were out of state at school, and had I understood some of these signs, I could have gotten them home to the hospital before she passed away. And as it turned out, I wasn't able to. Um, and so just looking back on your experience, I don't imagine you probably studied up on, what are the signs of death, but, had you known some of those kinds of things, would that have made those last few days any easier, or, would it have helped you in any way?
Maybe. And what the breathing thing was what was so hard for me.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, like that's part of what happens. They are fine. They're not feeling discomfort and any of that sort of thing. But it was just hard for me to hear that.
Yeah.
And, and then the he passed away one morning, and that night I had not slept at the hospital, but a good friend of ours had. And Steve was alive when that friend got up to go to the bathroom to get ready for work. And then when he came out of the bathroom, Steve had passed. And, to me, that's a beautiful thing because I guess he got to pass away like not alone, but kind of on his own terms a little bit. That's at least how I saw it. And my friend called me and I ran over there because it was not very far. And I got there and, I was with Steve and I'm like, okay, now what do I do? And like, we didn't have a plan. Like, who do I call there's a body, like now what? And should I call a priest? Um, so I'm like, well, I guess I should have a priest here. And so then the hospital chaplain came, which was lovely. Um, but I hadn't walked through it all, and I knew this was coming in my mind. Like, okay, what is the are the next steps? My daughters were not sleeping at home. I don't think. At least one of them wasn't on. They were on a sleepover or something. So I called my daughters. I'm like, okay, should my kids be here to like see their dad? I don't know. Like I'd never thought through that. And I mean, the answer was yes. I had them come, and it was up to them, like if they wanted to come in and have a moment with their dad, and they did. Um, and then there's, what happens physically to the body in time after someone dies. And I didn't know any of that either. Um, and we had a friend who had a friend that owned a funeral home. So that person came and took Steve's body and we had him cremated. And I knew we hadn't planned like what kind of service. Would you like a wake? Like any of that. And there wouldn't be a wake because he was cremated. But I'm like, I don't want to do any of it. This whole thing has been so hard for 3 months. I don't want to stand in line and have people come up to me. And it was just too hard. So we had a party. And my good friend belonged to our local country club. And frankly, she and her husband threw the party. And we had a lot of people that came. Um, and of course, they expressed their condolences. And I hadn't set up like a receiving line because I didn't want any of that, but there kind of was one started. I'm like, oh no, man. And so after an hour, I'm like, I can't do this. And so, I went and it's still part of the, like, I just need to sit down. And so, and then we had the funeral the next day. The press were there at our church.
So,
Um, they, we had people that did not allow them in. We had to kind of sneak in the side door of the church because I really didn't want the girls and I being filmed walking in the church. And and I mean, they interviewed people outside of the church, like friends and family, and the press interviewed our neighbors over the 3 months, and it's crazy. It's crazy.
Did
Wow.
you did you feel a lot of anxiety in just the process of deciding all of these different things and what you wanted to do, or did you have somebody that kind of took that out of your hands and did it for you?
I guess I decided the big things like I would love to have a party. My friend executed the party and made that happen for sure. Um, I'd like to have him cremated. I had a friend that, called the person who came to do all like so yes, I did have people do the task. I mean, I think I made the big decision and then other people absolutely helped execute.
Yeah.
So let's just kind of jump ahead to just he's passed away. A few weeks, a month, kind of past the services and the party, and you're now kind of trying to get back into just a normal life. So let's just talk a little bit about the impact of his not being around. So first of all, financially, his income now. Obviously, we're going to talk about you're taking over the business, so perhaps that sort of supplemented the income loss. But initially, how did just not having him around, like what was the hardest part about that? Just in terms of like running a household.
I just questioning decisions, questioning solo parenting. Like, I don't know. Should I not send my child to school today? Should I send my child to school today? Um, you know, is it okay? I'm not going to the soccer tournament. Parenting stuff, I think I really missed having my person to make decisions together about that. Um, there were things certainly I just like all the logistics in the household um and I mean the money part. So about 70% of our money was in the business. And I mean I couldn't get it out um until selling the business, if that was even possible, which it was ultimately, but um
Not
and
right away.
not right away. And you know, our savings had dwindled. We actually had come to a decision together, like I was going to go back to work that fall, like a couple months after this happened to Steve. So, mentally I was ready. I was going to go back to work to help supplement our income. And then, yes, I was thrown into running the business. And so then I did have a salary. I had benefits, like, what happens to your benefits
Right.
when your husband's the person working? And
Mhm.
yeah, so I didn't have to worry about that because I was able to get those through the business. We
And
did,
you did have some life insurance, right? I think you told
we
me that
did, we
offline.
did
Yeah.
have some life insurance, and that was a decision probably Steve and I made back when we, started the business, and mentally he and I sat down and we're like, okay, you know, how much life insurance does one get? I do not know. I don't know the answer to that. But he and I together said, okay, if he was to die, like we wanted to have 2.5 years of kind of runway for me to like not work, need to work, like grieve, process that. So that I don't even know how we came up with 2.5 years, but that's what we did. And so it was not like sail off into the sunset life insurance money by all
That's
means.
that's a
Uh,
myth.
yeah.
That does not exist.
But I mean, was it a bridge and was it really helpful? Oh my gosh. Absolutely. I couldn't imagine not having that. So I'm grateful for that. I am secondly grateful for workers' compensation, which I didn't know anything about. Because this happened at work, workers' compensation covered all of this. So it was not run through our insurance. It was, handled that way. Um,
Hmm.
and I mean, his bill, I mean, it was over $1 million. There's
Oh,
no
yeah.
way. That would have, because we would have certainly owed a percentage of whatever. Um, so that was a blessing.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go back now. Let's talk about your taking over the business. So
Can I
what
just ask, what was
was
your background beforehand? Like, what was your, I mean, you did say that you earlier on did a little marketing and a little this and a little of that. Did you have that experience previous, or was that just like, okay, I'm going to help out and figure it out?
So some, I started my career in sales for a large corporation and I worked for them for 7 years. Then I was in association management, nonprofit management for a while. And then I transitioned to the business. Um, so no, I never run a business before. I certainly hadn't done bookkeeping, but I'm like, I'm a smart person. I can figure this out. And we talked about it every day, the business. I mean, over the like I guess 14 years that Steve was involved with the business. So I knew the employees, many of them. I knew many of the customers. I traveled on some vacations or like work trips with Steve. So I was aware of kind of friction points in the business. I was aware of things with clients, um, at that level. So I'm grateful for that. It would have been nice business wise. I mean, it would have been more than nice. Had we had a direct plan written down in advance, like if Steve were to die, this is what happens. And like Steve and I actually walk through that. The executive team, we walk through that. The board of advisors, like everybody is aware, everybody has said document. Um, that would have been really great.
Yeah. So that, um, I think most people call that an operating standard operating agreement for their business. And if you talk to the experts, they'll say that that should be actually one of the first things you do when you start a business is kind of put that in writing to outline if that something happens to me or to a partner or whatever, this is how we take over the management of the business and ownership and all those things. And the reality is, in a lot of ways, it's kind of an exit plan, right? But nobody's going to put an exit plan together when they're first starting the business. You're trying to figure out how to make money and keep your costs down. And so it is for especially for a small business, it's a hard thing to put together. But you know this is sort of a case in point where this is kind of why you really should do it if you can, because you just crazy things happen. And so without that, all that documentation, how did the transition go with you
You
starting up?
navigate it
Like,
all.
did you show up Monday morning and say I'm here, or did it sounded like the leadership at least embraced you and brought you in and kind of gave you a runway to get started. And yeah, how did the employees react to your coming in and taking over?
Yeah, and Corey and Katie, likely there was a whatever the legal documents that the company needed, I'm sure they had. I never saw them.
Yeah.
I was in very close communication with our corporate attorneys, who also were our personal attorneys.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, I saw them a lot because there were questions of like, okay, because Jody doesn't have power of attorney, like, do we need to go through this legal process? And do we need to sell the company now because that's in the best interest of the shareholders? Like all of those kind of conversations were going on. And that's that was a whole other piece of all of that. But yes, so to answer your question, I believe I went into the office about 2 days later, um, to an all company stand up. There were 65 employees and just reassuring them like Steve is alive. He's been through surgery. I know this had to be very difficult for all of you. Thank you for all of your support that you've given and and it's business as usual, I guess, as best possible. And there was a problem because the press had said um, we were downsizing as an organization, which is why the gentleman lost his job, which was not true at all. And so here that is out in the press. So we have to kind of dispel all that, which is hard. And we didn't want to lose any clients. And so and we didn't, which I'm incredibly grateful for, which I'm testament to the employees, testament to the clients. They all just loved Steve. So,
Just think it's remarkable how a brain can compartmentalize in a time of absolute trauma where you can like, oh, I just had to sign a paper about my husband's surgery, and by the way, now I'm going to go talk to you about our business and how that's going to work, and now I'm going to talk to the employees, and now I'm going to talk to the press. Like the press, the friggin' press,
yeah.
like that's a thing for me. I just can't. But you did it. I mean, what a testament to you
And
that you
Katie,
were able to do it.
your word of compartmentalize is how I lived. Like I would go to the office and I just had to know that my children are okay. Like I've got the nanny set up, I've got my parents, I've got the community support friends, that all of that is being handled because I need to focus on this while I'm here. And and I lived that way for many years, because kept the business for 2.5 years and it needed to grow. It turned around, it grew, and ended up selling to private equity, which was always the goal, since we had friends and family investors as well. And so that extra pressure of it wasn't just our money on the line and the employees' jobs and their livelihoods. We had friends and family that had put in money in this business too. And so that was on my mind as well, for sure.
This is an odd question, maybe not, but did you have any contact with the shooter's family at all, or
No,
no?
no. And I don't know what I
Not
would
that you
have
should.
said.
I just wondered.
Yeah. No, I've been asked that question before and I haven't. I mean, to this day, I haven't.
Yeah. All right.
So I know this is a really hard question because it's hindsight, and things worked out, I think, really well. You did a really good job taking over the business, and I think you mentioned that you sold it, and but what advice, I guess, would you have for all the small business entrepreneurs out there to their spouses when they think about if something happened to my husband or wife who owns this business? Do you have any advice for the idea of taking on the business if they should pass away, or how do you prepare for if something like that should happen? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Uh, so plan sooner rather than later, meaning write down in writing what your succession plan is, what your operating agreement is, make sure all your ducks are in a row. Don't put off for tomorrow what can be done today because you don't know what's going to happen. I think had I been actually actively engaged and working in the business, um, prior to his death, that would have been helpful for sure. Um, but just having a clear written plan that not only family is aware of, but other parties are aware of, and whatever you can take off the family from needing to run the business, try to do that because you're trying that's a true gift to your family of allowing them the space to grieve and take care of family stuff, knowing that the business is in good hands and following the plan that you had mapped out to begin with would
Yeah,
be really helpful.
yeah. Well,
I have questions about your team, because I feel like that's the one thing that I put a lot of emphasis on when we talk about preparing, um, because you have to have one. You have to have a team. There's, whether it's your best friend or your mother, or your church, somebody. You cannot process this on your own and do all the things that need to be done. So, like, I had somebody who was sort of my go-to person who talked to everybody. Like, I don't have to tell the story over and over and over and over and over and over. So I did have somebody who was like my gatekeeper, I guess. And that was very helpful for my processing and for my healing, to have those people. I mean, and she took care of, like, because everybody's like, how can I help? What can I do? Like, I don't know what you can do. I don't know what I am doing right now. So don't ask me how you can help me. I don't know. So she would be the person who's like, okay, you bring dinner on Tuesday, you blah, 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 blah. And she had her committee, I guess, that helped out. And I just feel like you have got to have friends in your life. You have to have a community,
Mhm.
and be a part of somebody else's community. If that happens to somebody, you got to be there for them. I mean, it's crucial.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no way to do it on your own. Well, there is, but not well.
No, and it's hard for some people to ask for help or to allow themselves to be helped. And I mean, I was certainly not a person that would call on people for help prior to Steve's death, but I took all the help I could get. I mean, you want to take my kids to soccer? Great. Thank you. You know,
Yeah.
and I had a couple friends like yours, Katie, that were running quarterback on frankly setting up meals, like the carpool rides, getting things they needed for school. Because this happened too when in July. And so my kids head back to school while Steve was still in the hospital. And that's stressful without anything going on.
Yeah. Yeah. No kidding. Do you, you
Well,
mentioned you have a faith community that you, does that, were they of help, or was your faith in general, was that useful in your healing, grieving, knowing what he believed? Was any of that helpful?
Yes, yes, absolutely. From a community perspective, our church was there. At that time, our church was going through a change of minister. One had just left, the new one hadn't started. So we had an interim minister who didn't know our family, but was, did the best they could and had the service and those sorts of things. Um, the church, the night this happened for Steve, like had a vigil. Like everybody went to the church for that, the community and everything. And the men that were friends with my husband at church, they were, the ushers and frankly the bouncers for his funeral of keeping the people that don't belong in there, not in there. And
Mhm.
they had to draw that line many times. And that was really helpful. I think what's hard is also, and I still don't have the answer to this, but um, like for my kids, like why would God have this happen? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. And so, and their ages at that time were 9, 12, and 15. So their faith journeys today are very different than likely they would have been. And um, they're each in their own place with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a conversation with I have three sons, and we have the same, Corey and I have the same pancreatic cancer story. Mine was significantly quicker, but in any case, it's been helpful for me to ask them, like, what do you believe? What do you think has happened with dad? And they all have different answers. And it's been really lovely to just find out, what do you think about? What do you think? And some are like he's with God. Some are one is like his chemistry is with the universe, and he's at peace with that. And I'm like, great. I don't care what you believe, but it's helpful for my grieving to know what that is, and for my healing, and for them to know what I think and what I believe and what is peaceful for me. So yeah, it'd be interesting to ask them.
It would be. It would be. And I haven't asked that question for a long time. So it would be.
Do you have any little, what I call tender mercies? Anything that reminds you of him in ways that, like, okay, he's here, or like that's a reminder of, like, he's making his presence known. Like some people think of dragonflies or other things. I get lyrics that come to my mind. So I'm a musician, and I get lyrics that just out of the blue come into my mind. So I'm curious if you have anything like that.
Yes, and we all do. My daughters and I all do. We call them signs.
Yeah.
And even recently, gosh, and I wish I could remember specifically what it was, but one of my daughters texted me, she's like, Dad's here, and it was something. And it was fabulous. And he loved the song American Pie. And that's what he sang to our kids when they were small as a baby. And so that song will come on the radio at times when we need it. That's it. My daughter was at a bar and they played American Pie and she like sent a video of it. And so
Oh,
he's there and he's checking in.
yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. I love the idea of just, even if it's just some random thing, the fact that you can think about him in memory and smile, and that there are things that happen just for that, whether or not they're there or whatever, but just the fact that there are things in life that you can count on that will remind you of good things and of happy things in this terrible, tragic time. There is still good. And, even with your friends, I don't know, I think that is such a wonderful thing to be able to consider in horrible, tragic, terrible things. It's amazing how your friends and your people come through,
Yeah.
and nurses and people in the medical community, how just the little things they do to alleviate stress and pain or whatever. And it's just so stunning to me, the beauty of people
It's
when
so
they
true.
come through like that.
So true. And there are beautiful things that have happened that I know likely wouldn't have happened had Steve not died. And
Mhm.
obviously, I wish he was here every day. But I believe I'm a much more confident person. I am a leader. I am super proud of the strong, resilient, independent, feisty daughters that I've raised. And and they're proud of things. So it's always interesting where they're, um, I guess, where they share their lost story because they're not very forthcoming with that, or protective of it is probably a
Right.
better story. Um, and they'll share that with people that are close to them, but they're not public about it.
Yeah.
Well, we
Yeah.
got
My
just
kids
a couple of minutes remaining, and I did want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about what you're doing now. You, like us, are trying to make something positive out of a horrible experience, and so just kind of give us a quick rundown of what you're doing now and how that relates to this experience that you went through.
Absolutely. So after I sold the business, I still needed to work to make some money. Um, and I knew I wanted to do work that was really meaningful for me and helpful for others. And so I knew I wanted to help women in business in particular, and be in the grief space because it's still hard to be a woman in business today on a good day. And then when you layer on grief on top of that, it's really hard. And so I first launched my first business called Widows in the Workplace, where I coach and work via Zoom with widows one-on-one to help them find their path forward. And then a year and a half ago, I launched my second business to really increase grief literacy in the workplace. How can employers help their employees and managers understand grief better and so they can support each other better? And it's been a big success. So I'm happy
That's
about that.
so great.
It just warms my heart every day because I know I'm helping people.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and your journey. And it was an incredibly tragic story, but I think the way that you handled it I think, will provide a beacon of hope for a lot of people. And I know when we first contacted you, you said something to the effect of you didn't have anything planned. But I'll push back a little bit on that. I mean, you actually did some things that helped you. I think the fact that you had life insurance, you had a will, you, even though you didn't have it in writing, you had some conversations with your husband about what would happen, what do we do with the business if something happens to you. So kudos to you, and congratulations on the work that you're doing now, and we'll look forward to staying in touch and following, and hearing about your success in that area. And with that, I think we'll sign off, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody on the next episode. Thank you.
Um, Thanks for
Thanks,
having
Jody.
me.